You're listening to The Higher Ed Marketer, a podcast geared towards marketing professionals in higher education. This show will tackle all sorts of questions related to student recruitment, donor relations, marketing trends, new technologies, and so much more. If you're looking for conversations centered around where the industry is going, this podcast is for you. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast. I'm Troy Singer along with Bart Kaler, where each week we interview higher ed marketers that we admire for the benefit and the betterment of the entire higher ed community. Today we are going to highlight Guttman Community College in New York City by talking to their president, Dr. Larry Johnson. And one of the things that attracted us to this school is they achieve a 30 to 40% graduation rate within a community college setting, and the way they do it is very unique and very dynamic.
Yeah, it's great. And just for context, if not everybody understands it, community colleges historically are kind of in the teens, if not in the single digits on graduation rates. It's not uncommon. And you think about traditional 4 years, anywhere between, 50 to 70%, maybe a little bit higher on some schools. But it's a pretty outstanding thing, especially for a community college to achieve 30 to 40%. And I think a lot of what he talks about is different ways that they do that. And I think the way that they even talk about themselves and the marketing that they do is a part of that. And so pay attention to that. It's a really good conversation.
Even though we're talking about community colleges, I think once you listen to this, there are a lot of things that you can take away and implement at any school.
That's right. That's right.
Here's our conversation with Dr. Larry Johnson. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Larry Johnson, president of Guttman Community College, to the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast. Dr. Johnson, I'm so excited to let everyone know about the dynamic nature and business model of Guttman Community College. Before we do that, if you can give us a bit about your background and who you are.
Absolutely. Troy, thank you so much. I'm glad to be here with you and Bart. Again, I'm Dr. Larry Johnson. I have the pleasure of serving as the second president of the Stella and Charles Guttman Community College. I began my career almost 20 years ago as a faculty member teaching English and literature with a background in medieval to Baroque studies. I graduated from Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, Florida with an English literature degree, and from Florida State University with a medieval to Baroque studies degree and a focus on those time periods. And then Clark Atlanta University with a doctorate degree that really focuses on Africana women literature. And that began my career in higher education, truly understanding the role of higher education in impacting the lives of so many young people, and especially our young men of color.
Thank you very much. And we're here to talk about the success of Guttman, and would love to talk to you about how the school achieves the 30 to 40% graduation rate that it does. Before we get into the meat of it, though, can you give us a background and how Guttman was created? What was the idea behind the school?
Absolutely. That is such a great question. So the vision of Guttman Community College was really formed around 2008. When at their time, CUNY Chancellor Matthew Goldstein charged a team with understanding really what was happening in the higher ed landscape around graduation and completion. So the formation of Guttman during this time, the inception was to dramatically increase graduation rates. And at the time, graduation rates were a little under 30% in the state of New York, and probably in other areas a little under 20%. So as we begin to really think about, or they began to think about at that time, how do we solve the problem of increasing graduation rates for that student that is the first time in college student? And that became really the impetus and the focus on how do you get those students into the college in a model that is where they enroll full time and ready them for transition to a 4-year college or university. And that became one of the high impact practices from looking at all of the other community colleges locally and abroad to really see what are the practices that are needed in order to help the college to be successful. And that became what we call our first year experience, as I'll talk about a little later.
That's great. And if I understand correctly, that you've got a unique relationship with City University. Tell us a little bit about that and how that kind of helped establish this.
Absolutely. So Guttman Community College is one of the newest community colleges in the city of University of New York, or also CUNY. So we are in that system of 25 institutions. There are maybe 7 community colleges. We make the 7 community colleges and a number of professional schools and a number of senior and comprehensive colleges. So we fit within this ecosystem to serve the community, prepare students to complete their associate's degree so that they can transition to four-year colleges and universities or directly into the workforce. But we do that a little bit more unique than what you may have traditionally heard of as community colleges.
And what is the demographic of the students that you serve at Guttman?
Absolutely. A great question, Troy. Our students are 55% of our students identify as Latinx. We are federally designated as a Hispanic serving institution, but also a minority serving institution. So 55% Latinx, but we have a large percentage of our students who identify as African American or African. And we have a number of students who are also Asian American as well. So about 90% of our students are from diverse backgrounds, which help us to also have that designation as a minority serving institution.
Larry, something that intrigued Bart and I is the 30 to 40% graduation rate that you're achieving within the community college community. And I'm sure other community college leaders will lean in and wonder how you are achieving that. And you've shared with us a little bit of what is a cohort model. So would like to unpack how this works. What is the model and how it may differ from a traditional community college experience?
Awesome. That is a great question, Troy. So the Guttman model begins with a student going through what we call an informational. So when students express interest in Guttman Community College, they are invited to come to a group informational session where they learn about what it means to be a Guttman Grizzly, which is the Grizzly is our mascot. But what is unique about the experience is that the first year experience for our students is where they enter into the college as a cohort. And as you look at best practices, we know that students who remain in a cohort, there's a likelihood that they will be successful. They're moving along together. They have that opportunity to engage. So the very first year, the students do not have the option of choosing their courses. The college chooses the courses for the students. They remain together in a house structure. In this house structure, there's about 25 to 30 students in a house structure. Those students are also provided a suite of support services where faculty and staff and also what we call student success advocates meet with each other throughout the week in a learning community fashion to really understand what are students struggling with, how do they need to pivot in any type of way to ensure that those students are successful. So that has really become the model of success that has helped students in 2 to 3 years graduate and the college to reach those successes of about 40% of graduation rates.
That's great. And I found that I used to do some work with the Lumina Foundation, and I know that they had supported with some grants various organizations, and I'm sure the Gates has done as well. But I remember the Posse Foundation just out of my memory, and there was a lot that similarity that just this idea of cohort modeling. And I think that we all know that, we as humans are drawn to community, and especially in times when we're a little bit, not sure of what we're getting into. I think this is just such a brilliant way to kind of assure the success of these students, especially students who might be first generation students. Maybe they don't have experience. Maybe they're, relying a lot more on Pell Grant type of options, and really being able to provide them a community of people that can help them see their successes. And I'm guessing that's kind of part of that. I don't want to call it secret sauce, but that has to be a little bit of what's really added to your success. Is that true?
Oh, that is true. And one of the, I would say, secret sauces, if you will, to use your language there, is the EOW course. So within the first year experience, there's a course that's called the Ethnographies of Work. Every student is enrolled in that course, and that is what provides to students the experiential learning opportunity. Those students are placed in internships where they're beginning to think about their careers, and we ensure that every student has an opportunity to really begin to think beyond the Guttman experience, but where is it that they want to go? What is their end result? And that has been a course that has really helped students to really carve out and to firm up those ideas around what does career look like for me in the future. And that has been a popular course ethos that has really been, I would say, one of the foundations of our model.
That's great. So that kind of leads us to our next part of the conversation, is just kind of talking about outcomes. I know that with Guttman, 30 to 40% is an outstanding outcome in and of itself, but we're not talking about just moving students through the Guttman experience. We're really committed to seeing their success in life. Tell me about some of those outcome stories and how that fits in with your mission and your vision.
Awesome. So Guttman Community College has provided an experience that I would also say this is more entrepreneurial in terms of helping students to really think about not just the academic curriculum, not just the pathways, but really it's a holistic development of the student. So I met with a student, for example, that has graduated from the college, finished his liberal arts degree, moved on to a four-year college or university, but he discovered that he wanted to be an entrepreneur. And what he credits is that he met with faculty and staff, but most importantly, it was the ethnographies of work course where we place students out in the ecosystem in New York City, in Manhattan, in these different experiences. And he began to really understand, yes, certainly the associate's degree and the baccalaureate degree is something that he would like to attain, but he discovered that there are entrepreneurial skills that led him to open up his own coffee shop that is now growing, and he's expanding throughout New York City. So that is the Guttman experience. So the Guttman experience ensures that students have an opportunity to go through that exploration phase. And that is why, again, we have the ethnographies of work. So when students are placed in those internships, they're meeting other executives, they can begin to really see themselves differently, and they have a different experience than maybe other community college students would have that are not, this model is not something that is akin to them.
Yeah, that sounds great, because I think that there is this misunderstanding or maybe unjustly a stereotype of community colleges that it seems to me like Guttman is really trying to break that mold and recognize that, this is a part of the education journey for so many different types of students.
Absolutely. And as we think about the experience for the student, we have traditionally served students who are, and this is very important, 17 and 18-year-old, the very traditional age students. Remember earlier I mentioned that our goal was to gradually and dramatically increase graduation rate for the first time in college students. But as we begin to look to the future, we also know that there are adult students. There are what we call disconnected youth who also need Guttman and this Guttman experience. And we're beginning to think about what do those workforce programs that can support those students, what could those certificate programs be that we can create in partnership with community-based organizations that could also support that student population as well. So I just see the beauty and the tapestry of now weaving in a traditional age student, as we know of other traditional community colleges, and the older student, and the synergy that will come out of those type of relationships.
I think that's great. And I think that goes back a little bit to your example in the story of the young man who was with the coffee shops and the entrepreneurs. It was because he had a multi-generational experience with faculty and staff that kind of opened his eyes up to some additional things. Imagine what that can be when you have the different cohorts of younger and, adult students doing this together. I really think that could really add to the richness of what you said, the tapestry of the institution. So bravo. That's very exciting to hear all of that.
No, thank you. And, I credit it to our faculty, our staff, all of the great work that they have led over the last 9 years. They are really the real champions in terms of how our students have really been able to get into this ecosystem and do well. I mean, you don't oftentimes hear of community college students being full-time. So this is something new, it's innovative, but we are also seeing the proven success record, and we want to continue this model and to continue to expand it to support student success.
That's great.
Dr. Johnson, we've, I think, highlighted Guttman and love what you've shared with us. And I love your energy. I love your passion. And I'm sure that you are a wonderful servant leader there on campus. If I may ask, are there any other points or highlights that you would like to mention on the podcast before we bring the podcast to a close?
Absolutely. So again, thank you so much, Troy and Bart, for the experience and being here. And you mentioned servant leader, and that is really who I am. The work that I do every day is really about improving the lives of our students. And I like to sometimes I characterize it as it's the least of these. And how can I be very intentional and lead from an equity-minded perspective. And that is what I am looking to do at Guttman Community College, to ensure that as we look at all of our processes, which I think is critically important right nowadays, as we've looked at the reckonings of everything that has happened over the last 2.5 years, we as leaders have to be very intentional to ensure that no student is left behind, and that we are being able to be very courageous in the initiatives and the different perspectives whereby our students show up, and allow them to be their authentic selves, and then we meet them where they are to help to take them where we know that they can be.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that there will be others inspired by this conversation like Bart and I are. For those who would like to reach out and connect with you, what would be the best way for them to do so?
Absolutely. So I believe in the digital age. So certainly anyone that would love to stay in contact with me can follow me on Instagram. I would say it's Guttman Prez, and that's Guttman Prez, Guttman Prez, and that's Instagram, that's Facebook, and on Twitter, it's Guttman Prez CC.
Thank you. Dr. Larry Johnson, we appreciate your time that you've given us, and I'm sure that you've inspired others and given others a lot to think about. Bart, do you have any last thoughts before we wrap up the episode?
Yeah, I'm really grateful for Larry being on the call today and on the podcast. I think that he brings up some things that I think sometimes as higher ed marketers, whether you're in the community college or whether you're in more of a traditional college or university, sometimes we forget about those extra touches that it might take for students to be able to see success. A lot of what Dr. Johnson shared today reminds me of some conversations that we had when Nate Simpson from the Gates Foundation was on the podcast a few months ago. And actually Nate introduced us to Larry. And so I'm grateful for him on that. But the idea that we work so hard sometimes as higher ed marketers to get students into the door. And then we kind of feel like, okay, our job's done. You know, they're in there. They should succeed now, because that's what happens. A student shows up on campus or shows up on class and they should just succeed. But I think what I really like about the Guttman model is that we don't take that for granted. And I don't think any school can afford to take that for granted. We have to put programs, communications, even marketing, if you would say it that way, in place to see that student success all the way through to the next point of where they need to be, whether it's graduation from your institution or kind of those first destinations afterwards, if they're going to be going to a 4-year degree after an associate's degree, or if they're going to be going to a job or military service or graduate school, whatever those next destinations are, we want to help prepare them to get that first choice that they have and to see that succeed. And so I really like the idea, and I really would challenge our listeners on your institution and your campus. How can you start putting things in place, whether it's community-based cohorts, kind of like what Guttman is doing, or if it's just ways that you're communicating with the students, making sure that you really pay attention to what their needs are for their success.
Thank you, Bart. What a wonderful thought to close our episode on. The Higher Ed Marketer Podcast is sponsored by Kaler Solutions, an education marketing and branding agency, and by Think Patented, a marketing execution printing and mailing provider of higher ed solutions. On behalf of Bart Kaler, my co-host, I'm Troy Singer. Thank you for joining us.
You've been listening to The Higher Ed Marketer. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player. If you're listening with Apple Podcasts, we'd love for you to leave a quick rating of the show. Simply tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. Until next time.